Hello, friends. This is Sam Cheney reporting for Weaponized News. Today is September 13th, 2023. Go to my Twitter page at Weaponized News, reporting about the COVID-19 hospital protocols kill protest in memory of a victim. Today we had a rally in front of Clovis Community Hospital. Everybody go check that out and warn your friends and family as they launch this next round of COVID that they will kill you in these hospitals. The only approved drug is remdesivir. Refuse remdesivir. That's been going on today. Also, before we get to Simon about this geopolitical news about our disgusting traitor of a Secretary of State, Blinken, giving his announcement, the end of the post-Cold War era is here now. And so we're moving into, I guess, a hot war era. And so it's just disgusting treason. We're going to play a little clip of his speech, but everybody should go watch the whole speech and listen to how these treasonous pieces of garbage talk. They're not Americans. They're internationalists. They're globalists. And they say the international order. He references the UN Charter of Human Rights, not the Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution, as you would think a U.S. Secretary of State would be referencing. No, that's he doesn't reference that at all. He references the UN, and so he's a total globalist traitor. And I knew this, but I don't listen to him like Simon does, and track it every day. But it's worth listening to give you some insight about just where they're coming from, because they hate your guts, America. American citizens, taxpayers, they hate your guts. They don't represent you. They represent the international order, and they say it. And anybody that's ever looked into it should know this. But just watch this speech today. They reiterated. I watched it, and it's despicable. It makes you want to throw up, and it's treason in your face. They don't care, right? They're in charge. But before we get to the geopolitical, and they're trying to start World War III with Russia. I mean, these are literal crazy people. They brag about. Simon and I were talking a second before we went live here. They brag about putting women in charge. I forget even what it was, of immigration, and it's just beyond ridiculous. Anything for diversity, it's just. Everybody should go watch it and you'll throw up. But maybe we're going to report on it here so you don't have to watch it and get inside analysis from Simon from Florida and myself. But before we get to that, let me report on this, because I was telling people this. People don't even know about some domestic California news here now that I find is significant that we need to report on before we go to Simon. This was a significant development that happened yesterday, reported by Congressman now Kevin Kiley. A huge embarrassment for Newsom and the supermajority. Their COOF, medical censorship law, has been so thoroughly condemned across the political spectrum and roundly rejected by courts that the legislature is repealing its own law a year after passage. And of course, this is the New York Times. LA Times headline: controversial law punishing doctors who spread COOF misinformation on track to be undone. And so it's just beyond ridiculous, beyond tyranny. And so it's so bad they have to repeal their own tyrannical law because of how illegal it is. And so that's some significant good news that I hope you would spread around and tell everyone you know, because I told everybody I knew at the Liberty lunch meeting today, and no one knew. So I was like, hey, we do have some good news here. So spread the word that they're forced to roll back their own tyranny here now. It's just beyond the pale, but that's the times we live in here in 2023 as they roll out the one world government scientific dictatorship here. Everybody go to weaponizednews.com/shop. Help us out. Get yourself the classic white background sticker there, the holograph sticker, or the clear sticker. You can put it on your laptop, your bumper, your guitar. Now's a better time than ever to speak out to your friends, family, neighbors, acquaintances, and tell them, hey, We're losing all our rights. They're openly announcing one world government. Now's the time to stand up for our inalienable natural rights that are endowed to us by our Creator, our birthright of being American citizens, before we don't have any more at all. They're spitting on our inalienable natural rights. So you need to tell your friends and family about it now and support weaponized news, independent journalism, and free speech. weaponizednews.com/shop. We appreciate everyone tuning in, and we appreciate all your support. Now, without further ado, we go to Simon from Florida. How you doing today, Simon?
Hello there, Sam. Now, I must say, whilst agreeing wholeheartedly with your introduction, I would also like to profoundly thank you for making the effort to listen to this 30-minute disgusting speech from Anthony Blinken. I mean, it's easy to chortle about it, but
painful. It's painful, but every American should listen to find
they
out.
really should, because this guy is like, what is he, fourth in line to the presidency? Right? Is that correct? Fourth in line?
Something like that, yeah.
Vice President, Speaker of the House, then Secretary of State, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe there's President Pro Tem of the Senate in the middle there somewhere. And he's like a long-term buddy of Biden. He's been involved all the way back to the...
He's trained, as you know, by Zbigniew Brzezinski, right? And he proudly brags about it in that...
Yeah, I mean, so we'll get into all those kind of details. But would you please just, after I make this one additional comment, then you can play that clip that we've prepared. But the other point in terms of us American conservatives actually being able to scratch a few victories is the news coming out of New Mexico as well. And that just goes to show you there the power of local sheriffs. It took the local sheriff in the affected county to stand up and say, I am not enforcing this. It is blatantly unconstitutional. Then the Democrat Attorney General of the state came out and said, anybody or social organization that sues the governor over trying to suspend the First and Second Amendment for 30 days at her whim will not find any opposition from the Attorney General's office. So, it just goes to show that showing a bright sunlight of truth on some of these real scumbag individuals, for want of another phrase, so that's probably as mild as one can extract, does occasionally have a net benefit, along with the lawsuit of Missouri versus Biden. But what we're talking about in terms of Merlin and Argos, and now this incredible speech from the Secretary of State, is that there are much, much greater schemes afoot. And what I try and do in my role, somewhat humorously as Prince of the Obscure, is to try and pull all these disparate points of information together and show you how they actually very, very neatly intersect. These are not massive stretches of imagination to connect one thing to the other. They're literally, multi-jointed pieces locking tightly in place, like, a gear wheel. And so with that, if you wouldn't mind playing that 40-second clip, and then we can go through not just the highlights of the speech, as Secretary Blinken boasted himself on his Twitter feed, but what you and I think are the lowlights from the low lives.
And of course, it's at John Hopkins. What is it?
John Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in their new building for the Zbigniew Brzezinski Institute. Now, what's important to remember there is his family are from the Oblast of Ternopil, which is part of the Kingdom of Galicia in Western Ukraine. These people are up to their eyeballs in direct family historical connections to Western Ukraine, the land that fostered Stefan Banderas.
All right, let's go to the clip from our esteemed, sold-out, treasonous Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken.
mistrust and disillusion that they fuel in people who feel the system is not giving them a fair shake. And the more they exacerbate other drivers of political polarization, amplified by algorithms that reinforce our biases, rather than allowing the best ideas to rise to the top. More democracies are under threat, challenged from the inside by elected leaders who exploit resentments and stoke fears, erode independent judiciaries and the media, enrich cronies, crack down on civil society and political opposition, and challenged from the outside by autocrats who spread disinformation, who weaponize corruption, who meddle in elections. Any single one of these developments would have posed a serious challenge to the post-Cold War order. Together, they've upended it. So, we find ourselves at what President Biden calls an inflection point. One era is ending, a new one is beginning. And the decisions that we make now will shape the future for decades to come. The United States is leading in this pivotal period from a position of strength. Strength grounded in both our humility and our confidence. Humility because we face challenges that no one country can address alone. Because we know we will have to earn the trust of a number of countries and citizens for whom the old order failed to deliver on many of its promises. Because we recognize that leadership starts with listening and understanding shared problems from the perspective of others so that we can find common ground. And because we face profound challenges at home, which we must overcome if we're going to lead abroad. But confidence, because we've proven time and again that when America comes together, we can do anything. Because no nation on earth has a greater capacity to mobilize others in common cause. Because our ongoing endeavor to form a more perfect union allows us to fix our flaws and renew our democracy from within. And because our vision for the future, a world that is open, free, prosperous, and secure, that vision is not America's alone, but the enduring aspiration of people in every nation, on every continent. A world where individuals are free in their daily lives.
Okay, Sam, you can cut it there if you like.
Everything he says that we're against, they're doing.
No, I mean, it is, particularly the first few sentences there, it is absolutely staggering. Like, every single thing that he says are internal and external challenges to other democracies in the world, right? He's talking about unjust judiciary. He's talking about exploiting resentment. He's talking about election interference. And, you know, as we're here considering the potential start of impeachment inquiries, he's talking about institutional corruption and politicians enriching their crony friends. And this is what he says other countries are doing to America's allies. But it's all total psychological projection. This is exactly what is happening within our republic over the last few years and ongoing. It's absolutely staggering. And, you know, frankly, this speech, and we'll provide the link to the show announcement and the recorded podcast. And it's, you know, it's almost so incredible that one wonders if it's a deep fake, right? But it's literally on the website of Johns Hopkins University and the US State Department YouTube channel. So it's pretty verified sources, and it's been up since about noon New York time.
Yeah,
okay?
Let's just throw that up there again, right there. U.S. State Department YouTube, right there. They didn't get many views on it, though, and that's what they count on, of course. And so thank you, Simon, for pointing this out.
Well, I mean, when I was running around screaming, it had 2,300 views. Now, I watched it live. I rewatched it, and then I, you know, started harassing you, for which I beg your forgiveness. And, you know, one can see that this is very, very important. Now, obviously, with your dedication and your devoted audience, we're able to address this, you know, in in all its complexity. But, just so that people understand, where I come from, and I appreciate that I'm kind of maintaining a private persona. But, I went on and discussed this for 4 or 5 minutes with George Galloway, 3 million viewers. That was my 22nd appearance with them. And they were fully booked. They had 3 guests. And I put my entire reputation on the line, spoke to their producer, and I said, have I ever lied to you? Have I ever been disproven? And he said, no, you've been utterly reliable. And I said, please give me 4 or 5 minutes. And they did. And similarly, I called into TNT Radio and literally in Australia, and they broke into their programming and gave me 10 minutes of the next show. And the 2 hosts were just stunned. So now we have the opportunity of really analyzing this in detail. It's important really to, one has to look, it's just like Angels and Demons and Dan Brown and, Tom Hanks and all those movies about the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff, right? You've got to look at the day, the timing, the location, who's doing it, anniversaries, and the symbology, okay? And, often these things impart messages as well. Now, Vladimir Putin, what a lot of people don't realize is he named all of their missile systems for 20 years based upon characters and occurrences from Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book. Their top intercontinental ballistic missile, the SS-28, that's known as the Sarmat missile, or Satan II, okay? Sarmat is the first name of an Indian author who wrote a modern version of the Jungle Book called the Urban Jungle Book. I joke you not. The most powerful Russian intercontinental ballistic missile is named after the author to the sequel of the Jungle Book. Okay? And I went through this in great detail once for another show. I found 37 examples of missiles and rocket systems being named from that book. Okay? So, the famous missile that everyone's talking about at the moment, the Kinzhal missile, the one that's supposedly impossible to shoot down, Kinzhal, okay? That is a curved dagger, like the Arabs have tucked into their waist belt. You've seen those where they're curved at the bottom? The Kinzhal dagger, right? So the character Mowgli, who's the hero of the Jungle Book, in the Russian version, and once again, here's where it gets more complicated because there's 3 versions. There's an English version, there's a Disney version, there's a German version, and there's a Russian version. In the Russian version, the hero of the story, who's older than in the English and American version, has that dagger on a rope around his neck, the Kinzhal dagger. And that's their number 1 tactical missile at the moment. So, we can make these analogies, but they're often really, really close, if not the literal truth. Okay? So, this gave a very, very distinct message to the Russians and the Chinese. He named them out specifically. It wasn't like an allusion, like the Russians, they don't like saying the British, they say the Anglo-Saxons. The Chinese don't like saying the Americans, they say the hegemonic power. The Iranians really say Israel, they say the Zionist entity. Okay? And so in this case, what he was saying was that we are now, right now, as in like today, at the end of the post-Cold War era. And this is the period that we've been supposedly crystallizing the peace dividend. But that hasn't happened. The expenditure on the military-industrial complex since 1991 has more than doubled. Okay? So we haven't put it into dealing, as he refers to there, quasi paraphrasing from John F. Kennedy's 1963 peace speech, dealing with our internal profound challenges, which I'm sure, whether it's mass migration or poor school grades or poverty or poor health outcomes, or our government trying to genocide us with untested medical interventions in an injectable form, America, and this is not trying to be derogatory or insulting, America generally has a lot of domestic problems. And when we're spending $1 trillion a year, more than that when you put in all of the pension and VA costs and stuff, we've got some difficult choices to make. And unfortunately, the choices that they are trying to induce, not just the American population, but also beyond our allies, the third world, otherwise known as the global south or the non-aligned movement, right? Who next week have their conference in New York called the G77, but it's more like the G150. It's 3/4 of the world that aren't members of the former Warsaw Pact or the current NATO, right? He is specifically saying that in an era of now intensifying competition that extends beyond the Russian-Ukraine war and into the People's Republic's long-term goals, that he himself acknowledges that they hold the power to achieve. He admits that China has the power to achieve its goals, and he specifies the elements of national power that they hold. Okay, political, military, diplomatic, and economic. He spells them out. Okay, now he's saying that together, Russia and China are trying to make the world, and this is his catchphrase, together they're trying to make the world safe for autocracy. But this is a different kind of autocracy from our allies in Bahrain or Qatar or Oman or Saudi Arabia that all have executive monarchies. Okay, it's like, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Okay, and I'm not trying to just give you a string of cliches. This is what American foreign policy, as it's been announced today, intended to last for decades, irrespective of who gets elected in a year's time. They are really pushing this out as a choice between what they describe as the Western New World Order or the Sino-Russian alternative to that. There is a name for that, and the name is, and this is why you'll recognize the phrase the new era, because it's in the Chinese name. It's called the Greater Eurasian Partnership in the new era. And he is literally saying we are going into the new era. That is now universally accepted, whether you're India, China, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, England, Sweden, France, Germany. Like they talk about transitions and like they talk about transformations, that is happening. And you can argue about whether it was tomorrow, today, yesterday, last month, at Christmas, but it's happening this year. In epochal scales, it is very, very closely defined. We're not arguing about what month the last ice age ended. He is telling you on video, it started now. And right now, he's saying to all the other governments in the world, the 200 of which are among the 3,000 people that have currently watched that video on YouTube on the State Department channel, they're all sitting down saying, what are we going to do? They've told us that neutrality is not an option. This is not just about Ukraine. This is literally as he explains it, decades into the future. It's beyond Biden's lifetime, which is probably weeks. It's beyond his lifetime, which is probably 20 or 30 years. We're talking about, at least halfway into this century. Okay, and you've got to remember that already the globalists are hatching schemes that involve India in 2060 and China in 2070 in terms of net zero. Edinburgh in Scotland is beyond Agenda 2030. They are now officially in their public city planning documents planning for Agenda 2050 with no personal transportation. Cars are gone, not just gasoline and diesel cars, everything. Okay, so these things are not fanciful, they're not conspiracy theories, they're not my opinion. I truly wish it was that simple to dismiss. But what it requires is a great deal of digging. Now, Blinken saying that the countries have been, since he called with the German foreign minister and the Ukrainian foreign minister, for them to get off the fence in relation to Ukraine, literally, like George Bush said, you're with us or you're against us. He put that call out in Munich at the Munich Security Conference in March. They've waited 6 months. Now we're at the point now where many analysts are in agreement, even those who have been cheering Slava Ukrainia for the last 18 months, right? That the Ukrainians are in deep, deep doo-doo. Okay? That, the shit's really hitting the fan. And now they're having to think, what do we do? How do we keep NATO in one piece? How do we save faith? How do we avoid a publicized fiasco like the retreat from Afghanistan? It's a huge problem, and it's a problem not just for 10 countries now, but it's a problem for about 50 countries that have been supporting Ukraine to the tune of like $200 billion, with America and the European Union planning that out another 4 years. So the entire presidency of whoever wins, and the Germans are trying to plan it out 10 years. 10 years. Think about that in political terms. Think about your show. Can you imagine saying now, this is what my show is going to be about on the 13th of September, 2033?
Still reporting on the Russia-Ukraine war.
No, I understand, and I agree with you. But these bureaucrats, they're trying to say, we don't care what our public opinions indicate. We don't care what the speeches on the Senate floor are, and we don't care what the election results are. Okay? Just remember what old Smedley Butler said, right? War is a racket. Remember that general from the 1930s, Smedley Butler? Major General Smedley.
Yep. We report on that many times, yeah. War's a racket for sure.
And that is what they're trying to tie us down for 5 to 10 years. Right? Now, I mean, what's particularly staggering is, in conjunction with the Rand Corporation, who this week have directly accused the Russians of using propaganda to distort the Western public's perception of reality in Ukraine. Okay? But we've also this week had the New York Times, okay, in a major article that most significantly was not behind a paywall. So anybody who in the slightest follows the New York Times, and I understand many of your audience may despise them, right? But generally, if they post a headline on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, for example, okay, you click on it and it says you either have to register, tell us, all your DNA code, or pay for a subscription. Okay? And when they really, really want to get that message out, they say this is a gifted article so you can read the whole thing for free. And that's what they did this week when they alleged that all of the counter-narrative information that we are receiving via social media about the Lahaina Fire in Maui, Hawaii, all of the crazy stuff, that's coming directly from Chinese government artificial intelligence,
I saw that.
according,
Simon,
not to me, not to crazy Simon, according to the New York Times.
I hear you. I must be Chinese artificial intelligence, and so is the pastor that has relatives that live there. I interviewed 3 weeks ago. We must all just be a figment of the internet's imagination.
Yeah. So, but what's significant here is the same week that the Rand Corporation, which is the most prestigious deep state think tank in America, right? That the source of the Pentagon Papers, which explained with Daniel Ellsberg's assistance when the Washington Post would tell the truth about how America was lied into getting into the Vietnam War. Okay? So then they're now saying that anything else that we see is the result of disinformation or misinformation or malinformation. And Blinken is telling us that America and our allies need to defend against that, which is entirely the purpose, allegedly, of the Argus AI system that SOCOM has recently contracted with a New York firm called Accrete. Okay? So even if one were to think, okay, we're going to be defensive about this, Merlin, the new NATO-wide AI cognitive warfare system that's rolling out this week, is not reactionary. It is predictive, it is targeting, and it can clearly be changed from focusing on the population of Russia to focusing on the population of America at the push of a button. Okay, these events are upon us this week, not next week, not next year, this week. Okay, and so we've got this guy, and he's saying, much like the Rand Corporation and just like the New York Times, that this is what is happening to us. So he's literally saying, who are you going to believe? The US State Department via the Global Engagement Center, right? Or your own lying eyes?
I'm gonna believe. I'm not gonna believe them because they're known liars. So I'm not gonna believe them. Call me crazy, Simon. Here's that. What's going on here now about this story with the Army is now investigating itself, I guess, for the Argus AI system against American citizens. You have this.
They're saying that it's a violation in theory of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Yeah.
And that by contracting with this private provider, they're attempting to do a get around because the SOCOM, the Special Operations Command in Florida, but obviously worldwide, reporting directly to the president, would be directing taxpayer funds for this system to be further developed after it's been kind of like beta tested by special forces. And then it'll be available for sale to American private corporations who would not be subject to the same kind of restrictions that have now been espoused in the legal case of Missouri versus Biden. It's a classic get around, like when the Bill Gates Foundation or the Soros Open Society Foundation does something as opposed to a government institute, so they're not subject to freedom of information requests and sunshine laws.
Yeah, they just have the NGOs. They just outsource it to contractors. So here, why I wonder why the Army is pushing back here. Is my question. Josephina M. Martinez apparently is initiating this investigation. So the Army's investigating itself.
So, but I can explain that. is because it's what's called a limited hangout, right? So they go, oh, our bad. I shouldn't have beaten my wife, for another analogy, for the 10th time. And they're telling you that on the anniversary of the wife beater beating his wife for the 100th time.
Yeah, limited hangout. All right, Simon, let's cut to a quick commercial break here, and we'll come back with that song that you wanted to play. How's that sound?
So people should understand the song's 4 minutes. There's a specific purpose for this, which I'll explain. Just tolerate it. Watch the lyrics, which are in English. They'll translate the song, which is otherwise in Russian. Okay?
All right.
Did you ever imagine you'd be singing a rendition of The Sacred War by the Red Army Choir?
No, I didn't.
Well, that's what you just did. Okay. Now, the reason why that's significant is we can analyze some of the lyrics. I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But a video went viral of an entire carriage of the citizens of Moscow traveling on their metro, their underground, like you have in New York and Los Angeles, singing that song. Okay? And it's known by most Russian families. It was written in 1941. Some people argue whether or not it originates from the War of 1812, but there's another song that's about that, which is called Moscow is at Our Backs, Remember the Battle of Borodino. But this one in particular is about the Great Patriotic War against the Nazis. And it's interesting when we have the Secretary General of the United Nations telling us that the planet is now at boiling point, when you have these lyrics from 1941 saying that they will boil over like a wave and not just defeat their physical enemies, but defeat their ideas as well. And when we consider today this announcement about the next round of booster shots with little to no safety information whatsoever, it's interesting to see that they're talking about building a solid coffin in which to place the scum of humankind. I guess we can argue about whether or not the creators and the pushers of some of those jabs are still members of humankind or whether or not they've gone full lizard and globalist. But this is the situation where we find ourselves as, the last stalwart defenders of the Republic. And these people are announcing their plans loud and clear and right into the open. So what is concerning, if we get back to considering what Blinken was saying, was that America can lead the world, which they don't even debate for a second that there's any alternative. They don't say America and NATO. They don't say the North Atlantic countries. They don't say the Transatlantic Alliance. He just says America. That's it. America, we're the leaders of the world, whether you like it or not. Okay? And supposedly, we're going to have a positive impact because we have the two virtues of humility and of confidence. Now, when you declare yourself to be the leader of the new era for the world, I'm just asking you philosophically here, would you equate that to demonstrating the virtue of humility?
No.
Okay. So then he's saying that we can be confident because America, when we work together, can do anything. But essentially, a lot of what we have to fix is our own mistakes. He's literally paraphrasing and perverting President Kennedy's speech from 1963, which you have to bear in mind was at the time that he was trying to de-escalate tensions with the Russians. He was trying to prevent a nuclear war, and he was trying to prevent America from becoming involved in Vietnam. This is the speech that he gave in early 1963, and he was killed that year. And his order to withdraw American forces, which at the time were only the Green Beret advisors, right, was countermanded by Johnson. Kennedy was going to get us out by Christmas of 1963. The stage withdrawal was going to start at that point. They were all going to be out within 12 months. And one of the first things that Johnson did, and many people don't realize this, is he countermanded that withdrawal order and instead decided to send in like 250,000 American forces, many of whom were draftees. Okay? So people need to understand that he's literally perverting history and saying that this is what it's going to be in the future. Now, this is why Missouri versus Biden is important, and the Merlin cognitive warfare AI system that NATO's rolling out this week. Okay.
I mean, he said many of the people in that room listening to that speech at the this right here. He said many of the people in this room will be writing the history.
Yeah, because he's at a university and it's full of graduate students. And they're in the School of Advanced International Studies, and they're all going to be going into the CIA, the DIA, the State Department, and those type of organizations. It's like Georgetown. It's like one of the, you can flip a coin. Is it number one or number two for putting people into the US Foreign Service? So he's literally telling the next intake, this is what you're going to be implementing for the rest of your careers till you've hit your 30 and qualified for your pension. So imagine you're a boot private being screamed at by a gunnery sergeant, and this guy's not telling you this is what you've got to do for the next 6 weeks until you go to your advanced infantry course. He's telling you this is what you've got to do for the next 30 years. Okay, this is why it's so important. This is why I've been kind of freaking out a bit over this, because
we're in a new era. They announced it. The UN announced it. Now our Secretary of State announced it. So we're in a new era.
It literally, and it's like we have this saying: if someone throws down the gauntlet, or and in order to accept the challenge, you pick that up. Right? You're familiar with that phrase, right? Throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Okay, which is like the glove.
It's a challenge, yeah.
The challenge, right? So what he's doing today is he is saying to China and Russia, we officially, theologically, philosophically accept your multi-generational challenge. Like, let's go. Yep. Okay? So he begins by saying, and I'm going to revert right to the beginning and explain this, and also explain the contradiction here, or possibly how he's trying to be intellectual but not actually realizing that the trap that he's falling into by his own design. Okay, so he starts quoting the famous philosopher Nietzsche, who's generally regarded as being like a nihilist. He went through bouts of depression. It's kind of like the end of the world. Very appropriate for what we're talking about, the end of the world. Okay? Now, he is saying...
The end of an era, for sure.
He is saying... No, but this is specifically the end of the world from this Nietzsche quote. Okay? So he is saying that in Nietzsche's philosophy, one of his key concepts was that we should plan how to arrive at our intended destination without courting or suffering disaster along the way. Okay, that's relatively easy to understand, right? Did I say that clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm genuinely asking you to make sure, and so that's how he begins the speech at minute 41 after all the introductions and the delays and stuff, and he says that he's citing Nietzsche and that should be the goal of American foreign policy. And what he's basically saying is we have determined as the United States, without any consultation from our populace or our elected representatives, right, that these are what are going to be our long-term goals. And ideally, we'll be able to achieve that without triggering nuclear Armageddon. That's the courting disaster. But as we can see literally today with those overnight strikes with those 10 British cruise missiles, okay, called the Scalp system or the Storm Shadow, that are like $1.5 million each. That was a strategic strike on the harbor of Crimea at Sevastopol, okay? That was a distinct step or two up the ladder of escalation, okay? So literally less than 12 hours after doing a strategic missile strike on a number of Russian ships, including a Kilo-class submarine, he's then talking about, why don't we try and avoid disaster while we're achieving our policy goals? It's like utterly and totally incoherent. It's like spin the bottle for like a kiss and tell dating game or something, right? This is the level of sophistication that we're talking about. And what,
or the level of insanity that we're talking
but
about.
okay, I'm just got two things. One other thing about Nietzsche, and I appreciate that people don't want to get into kind of like, European philosophy, in great detail. One of his other concepts was called actively forgetting. Okay. And the concept there was that in order to enjoy life in the future, it's best to forget your mistakes of the past. And that is literally what Blinken is saying, without saying that he wants us to actively forget. He wants the world to forget about Vietnam. He wants them to forget about Libya. He wants them to forget about Syria. He wants them to forget about Iraq. And he wants them to forget about Afghanistan. So he's saying, without spelling it out, why don't you actively forget and trust us to run the next 30 or 40 years of the world's existence, assuming that we don't bring about the end. And the absolute kisser that everyone should have their bath bag ready for is the closing sentiment that he intends to fill our hearts with joy and reassurance, is the safe knowledge, in his words, that President Biden understands the world situation better than anybody else.
I have faith in Biden. I mean, they're impeaching him right now, but
Biden is excellent when it comes to active forgetting, but he's not too good about grasping the current world
I think
situation.
that's called Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that. Is the act of forgetting.
The active forgetting. Now,
I don't think it's a philosophical thing with him. He really is actively forgetting.
while we're talking about philosophy, I would draw people's attention to a recent article in the last 2 weeks from Alexander Dugin, who used to be called Putin's Brain. And this article is essentially, the gist of it is, the West, by which he means the culture of the West, is satanic. And so when one looks at the lyrics of the Sacred War, one understands now how many, I would suggest a majority of Russian citizens, have come to the recognition that they are literally engaged in a sacred or holy war that the Muslims would call a jihad. Okay? And so whilst we're tinkering around with trying to avoid a nuclear war, whilst at the same time feeding the military industrial complex with hundreds of billions of dollars, they recognize that they are in an existential crisis and they are engaged, albeit not on a total basis yet, in a sacred war. So it may have taken me an hour, but you can see how all of these points all come together, and it's not in a happy outcome, it's in a maelstrom.
Not good.
Did I render you speechless then?
No, I'm just thinking about looking up that deadly Ukrainian missile attack damages ships, leaves Russian shipyard ablaze. USA Today is reporting. So yeah, I didn't even know about that attack, but yeah, it makes sense. Their propaganda and their rhetoric is going to say that we're the great Satan, and of course we say the same thing.
Yeah, but don't forget, everyone mocks Medvedev because he appears to be a bit of an alcoholic. But in July, he put out a message saying, "You attack our facilities in Crimea, and that will bring about Judgment Day."
Yeah, that's a bold. It's escalating the war for sure.
And he's the deputy chairman of their National Security Council. Now, it's well known that he's seriously a hard vodka drinker, so you can take him or leave him. But he does have staff, apparently, who operate his Twitter account, who have a very, very good understanding of the Russian Bible. And I often cross-reference their quotes. And, they're talking about Job and Revelations and Armageddon and the Antichrist and the Kaddish-on. And, I'd happily talk at some point about the concept of who is holding back the Antichrist. Now, Russians suggest that actually it's Putin who is literally holding back Armageddon, because whilst many American politicians like to make out that he's one of the worst people in the world and that he's Hitler reincarnated, certainly many people in Russia actually feel that he's being too even-handed and not using all of the military might that Russia actually possesses.
Well, he did cause the inflation that we see, the Putin price hike. Somehow he controls monetary policy in the United States. That's what the Biden administration told us.
Blinken just said, Russia's causing apparently worldwide starvation, despite the fact they're trying to give out food for free. And he also weaponized oil and gas. But, it seems highly likely that it was actually the US administration with Norwegian assistance that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which is what drove European gas prices to astronomical levels. We're only at 10% of those levels now. And now we've had Viktor Orban with Tucker Carlson and Zelensky himself talking about attacking the Blue Stream and South Stream gas pipelines that go from Russia to Turkey to Europe. So we had Nord Stream last year. Now they're talking about doing another massive infrastructure attack this winter, despite the fact that the G20 statement last year expressly said that attacks on major civilian infrastructure that would cause death due to hunger or starvation or freezing or boiling or whatever are unequivocal acts of terrorism. And that was endorsed by the United States government. But they endorsed it 2 months after they did it. And now Zelensky's talking about doing it again in another 2 months. So this is the crazy kind of world where it's literally listen to what they say and realize that the truth is pretty much the opposite.
Yeah, it's very Orwellian for sure. That's I guess we're in the post-Orwellian era, we could say, because they're beyond even Orwell here now with their hypocrisy and just lying and propaganda. And of course, we should trust the New York Times and the State Department because have a long record of telling us the truth. We got like a minute left here. Simon, any last final thoughts before we wrap up this broadcast?
No, I would just encourage people to please try and endure speech. It's 36 minutes. We'll provide people with the links. It plays easy. There's no buffering. There's no ads. The audio is good. And also very interesting that there's no questions and answers, despite the fact that he's speaking to postgraduates and diplomats and ambassadors at an American university. Very unusual not to have Q&As at the end of that kind of address, since he's not even Biden. He's normally fairly competent. So he'd easily be able to handle a few, intellectual questions. The fact that he dashed off was indicative of the fact that he didn't want to be called out on the crazy policy.
Yeah, it's in the descriptions or the link is in the description below. Everybody should go check it out and remind yourself what kind of maniacs are running this country. It's a scary, crazy time to be alive here in 2023. We need to pray for peace. And the Orwellian nature of all of it, it's just, they say, we're for diplomacy, and then yet they're attacking, and we're in this proxy war. It's literally insane.
But, it's the point here, the one takeaway point is there's no more neutral. You literally have to pick a side. His speech today was the equivalent of Colin Powell on the 5th of February 2003, when he went to the United Nations Security Council with that test tube full of washing powder, said, imagine this is anthrax, and told them 17 times that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. That's the moment that we're at now, right today.
All right, Simon, thank you for your reporting and analysis and bringing this to our attention. We are in a new era. Excuse me, we're in a new era here now, and don't believe the fake news. Watch weaponized news is all I could tell you. The censorship's going to be coming down on us crazy. So and as you see, I was speaking in code, calling it coof. And so we may need to speak in a bunch of code to where you can't even understand us, use sign language. I don't know, because they're bringing down the heavy hand of censorship. And once, who knows especially if they get war powers, and I don't see how they could, but who knows, they're declare if we actually put boots on the ground, which we already have, but like more officially, if they officially say boots on the ground over there in Ukraine, over in Eastern Europe, in Russia, then, it's going to be a total war emergency, and who knows what would happen then. Total tyranny here in the United States. So, let's pray that doesn't happen, but they're pointing everything in that direction. So thank you for tuning in tonight. Everybody do your own research. As always, push that like, share, subscribe, notification button. Peace, love, and liberty. Speak out and take action, and have a good night.